Good day, folks, and welcome to the Anorak Review Show with I, your host, the Anorak. Back in last year's Halloween, or rather Anoraknoween, I talked a bit about Pink Floyd and their 1971 album, Meddle, and how it played a bigger part in their musical evolution than some people would let on. And today, I wish to go into another album of theirs, and one that, at the time of this recording, has turned 45 years old. And it too played a change of direction for the band. But before I get into the album proper, I wish to set the stage for a moment and talk about the background behind it. After releasing two big hits with 1973's The Dark Side of the Moon and 1975's Wish You Were Here, Pink Floyd decided to take a break from any touring for the entirety of 1976 and instead dedicate it to making a slightly different direction for their next album, musically and lyrically. For starters, after most of their albums up to this point were recorded at Abbey Road, this one was entirely recorded at their Britannia Row studios, which will be used to record parts of the rest of the album since then. And outside of that, the world itself was changing significantly by the mid-70s, for better and for worse. The UK's economy was low and inflation and unemployment were high. And with that came the rise of the punk rock movement, which saw not only a reaction to the growing political divides and fights over authority at the time, which when you think about it hasn't really changed all that much, but also a desire to distance away from the prog rock band and music which were seen as pompous and out of touch. In fact, Johnny Rotten, the lead singer of the Sex Pistols, often wore a Pink Floyd t-shirt with the words "I hate" crudely written over it. And however, later he would say that this was just for laughs and giggles, and that he was actually a closeted fan of those prog bands. Plus, the Floyd members weren't really offended by any of this. If anything, they related to the punks, reminding them of their underground club days back in the late 60s. Plus, one of those punk bands, The Damned, wanted Syd Barrett to produce the second album later in that year in 1977, Music and Pleasure, which was also recorded at Britannia Row. However, due to Syd's reclusiveness and mental health, they instead went with Floyd drummer Nick Mason to be their producer. And so Floyd bassist Roger Waters quickly came up with the main theme and concept for their next album, partially influenced by the George Orwell novel Animal Farm, in that it uses farm animals as a cautionary allegory for heavy-handedness and radicalism that capitalist-focused governments could be capable of, and how certain people are put into certain collective classes based solely on trivial traits. So with all of that, let's dig into Pink Floyd's 1977 album, Animals, and see if pigs really can fly, as long as we keep voting for them. And what could be said about the cover? Next to Dark Side, this is an equally iconic and recognizable cover, one that has been imitated more than once. It's a simple, eye-catching picture of the Battersea Power Station, which is not only a real place in London, but it's still there today for anyone to look for and find. And between two of its chimneys, in this otherwise desolate artwork devoid of life, a single pig is floating and levitating, almost still in a way, imposing over this otherwise this rotten technological dystopia, giving new meaning to the phrase "when pigs fly." And being a Pink Floyd album, it's a gatefold, which of course adds to the very bleak, almost dystopian feel of the album, with all these photos and pictures of various parts of the station, and even pictures of the pig balloon itself, definitely adding to the very desolate nature that we'll get over the album. And At first few viewings, this cover may look like a well-detailed oil painting and whatnot, but no, this is definitely a photograph. And there's a bit of a funny story or two behind this cover alone. Originally, Tom Thorgerson of Hypnosis, who had worked on all of the Pink Floyd albums since A Source of Full of Secrets back in 1968, he conceived the concept of a little boy opening the door to see his parents going at each other like animals. Like, you know, doing it in the bed. You can imagine why the band didn't go with that. Then again, this is the same bloke who originally conceived the idea of having a baboon's behind be the subject of a cover before Pink Floyd suggested an underwater ear. So, there you go. But instead, Roger Waters wanted a picture of the Battersea Power Station, which he had regularly drove past by for some time as it gradually approached the end of its useful life. And so, in the first few days of December 76, a crew was made to set out and shoot a few photos of the seemingly decommissioned factory, along with a 40-foot large pig balloon named Algae. However, in one of the attempts, the pig flew away out of view by accident, floating over Heathrow, forcing many flights to delay en route, and eventually landing near a farm near Kent and scaring a bunch of cows. Making the newspapers, this definitely added some publicity to the soon-to-be-released Floyd album. I wonder if one of those cows was used as that Adam Hart Mother cover. But soon enough, they recovered and fixed up the balloon, reshot another day's worth of pictures, pasted one of the pig cutouts onto one of the earlier takes of the factory, and we have the result here today. Plus, it's an awesome cover, so much so that my parents and I have a big frame of it downstairs. I'm serious, look it up. See? Well anyways, let's dive into the music itself and see if it truly lives up after 45 years. Side 1 begins with Pigs on the Wings Part 1. This, alongside the second part, act as the bookends for this album, very much like Shine On You Crazy Diamond in the previous album, Wish You Were Here. However, while that one was long and multi-parted, this one is short and simple. Just Roger Waters playing an acoustic guitar and singing what's extensively a love song for his then new wife at the time, Caroline Christie. While this doesn't exactly connect with the whole animal motif beyond the flying pigs reference, which of course is represented in the cover itself, it still kind of acts as a prelude that naturally eases in for the music, tone and mood and all else to come with the album. In this, Roger expresses how if we don't care for each other and one another, even if in a non-romantic sense, we would all be zigzagging our way through the pain and boredoms of life, blaming other people for our own problems, and glancing at rain, just staring blankly. Then he closes out by pointing out how we would also be spending our lives watching out for the pigs on the wing, likely warning us to look out for the individual pigs in power who may want to exploit, manipulate, and take advantage of us for their own gain. Although I guess in that respect, we do have those buggers to blame then. We then come to the other side of side 1, Dogs. Lasting at about 17 minutes, the longest track of the album also takes up the rest of side A. In this particular class of animals, the dogs represent the people in business and the celebrities with high fame and fortune. Kinda like the band themselves, come to think of it. It begins with a slow fade-in of a more sinister acoustic guitar accompanied by droning organ chords. Then the guitarist himself, David Gilmour, takes on the vocals and sings in a seemingly second-person perspective about a particular dog who, tries to be crazy, sleep on their toes, and take on any opportunity to strike competitors. Almost like he, as one dog, is instructing another less experienced dog the ways of life. And I say that in quotes. How they and we have to be charming and enticing, but also being convincingly deceptive and manipulative so we can backstab them before they could potentially backstab us. Then we get the first of many guitar solos by Gilmour, supported by the fantastic drumming of Nick Mason and the underlining synths of Richard Wright. We could even hear some faint Joker-esque laughter from Roger. If only DC and Warner Bros. Casted him as the Joker. Immediately afterwards, we'd get another verse from Gilmour where he ensures us to keep one eye over the shoulder and bury our heads in the sand, demonstrating how more and more challenging and paranoid life is going to get as we get older, and how inevitably it's going to catch up to us as soon as we die, specifically of cancer, which is a little bit harsh in hindsight considering what would eventually happen with Sid and Richard by the mid to late 2000s. We definitely do live in a society, don't we? And after a brief moment of Rick's mini moog, we then get struck by to the souls by one of the, in my opinion, one of the best guitar solos I have ever had the honor of listening to. The emotional harmonization, plus a third providing some vibrating bends, reverbs, and echoes, it just fills me with atmospheric energy. It's just something you have to listen to believe. And after that, we calm down for a brief moment with a bit of acoustic guitar, electric piano, and some distant sounds of dogs barking. Not unlike what we heard back in the Seamus song in Metal, although this time it's more meant to be serious and dramatic as opposed to being light and humorous. Then Nick's sudden drums kick in, and we get a third guitar solo from David, this time more dry and possibly devoid of any effects or filters. Sounding almost decrepit, exhausted and dehydrated. Then David sings one last time, eventually realizing the loss of control he, or rather we have. And the karma is now coming on to us. And how even after all we've accomplished, our lives end up becoming empty in the end. Or rather, we realize such. The weight growing more and more heavy on our shoulders, dragging us all down by the stone. The next 3 to 4 minutes are just this slow, bleak, metronomic rhythm where Rick Wright's synthesizers really take over and dominate. The very word stone gets looped over and over, fading in and out constantly, almost like a warning sign or alarm or something. And we even hear what sounds like some dog whistling, almost like someone trying to call out to our dog character. But even when they're both barking and whistling, they never really seem to get to it, never seem to reach out to each other. Almost as if there's something between them forcing them away from each other. Almost as if there was a wall between them. A metaphorical wall? Something to think about. Then we come to a semi-reprise of the beginning section. This time though, Roger Waters steps in to take over on vocals, singing from the first person's perspective, as if he's becoming self-aware and realizing the confusions and conflicting ideals enforced upon him. He then goes on to call out the dog-eat-dog society and its trust no one mentality. I also like to point out that this is the only time on this album that David ever sings in it. And as a result, Dogs is the only song here that has any co-credit besides Roger. Neither Rick nor Nick have any credit here. Bit of a shame, really, since Richard did really good with the keyboards in this song in particular. Anyways, after Roger's first verse, we get some more guitar solos, the second to last being a descending harmonic triad, and the last itself being mostly the same harmonic rock solo as earlier. Still equally awesome. However, Roger brings us to a climactic close where spit really starts to hit the fan. Quite literally in Roger's case. In a similar manner to Eclipse from Darkside, he repeats the about who was, how we'd be broken down and lose our identity and our individuality to the collective, how we'd break away from each other, how we're only strangers to our families due to being so far away from them, and how we'd spit at the fan. Yeah, this case might have been foreboding, for you see, in one gig in the Animals tour, or In the Flesh as it's called, a frustrated Roger literally spat right on a member of the crowd. The incident of which, in combination of the high stress of touring, the feelings of isolation among other things, would inspire him to create and establish the concept of their next album. And that album being 1979's The Wall. But that album's for another day, for another year. Though I do wonder who that fan is or was, and whatever happened to them. Or if anyone ever came forth and confessed to being the person being spat on by Roger. Anyway, here Roger echoes the dragged down by the stone on the very last line before the song finally crashes to a worthy and a well-earned close. And boy, is it a climax. I don't know what else to say about this song alone. The use of dogs as a political metaphor would eventually be revisited about a decade later for the song The Dogs of War for the 1987 album A Momentary Lapse of Reason. All in all, Dogs might just be one of Pink Floyd's best songs, if not one of the best prog rock songs out there that I have ever listened to. It's both dark and extravagant. It ultimately drags you to the soul by the stone. Some have compared the last verse and its use of who was to the poem Howl by Allen Ginsberg. However, Roger has confirmed otherwise, and this could most likely be coincidence. Anyways, flipping over to side 2, we have pigs, 3 different ones in brackets. This reminds me very much of Have a Cigar from Wish You Were Here. It starts with a very suspenseful, repeating synth melody, accompanied by some plucky guitar strings and what sound like pig grunts. In keeping with the animal theme, the pigs here represent those at the peak of society, blinded by power and wealth, those who would keep down those below them, not just at the bottom, so that they can stay on top. So basically, Boris Johnson and Joe Biden. Yeah, I said it. Come at me. This bluesy 11.5-minute piece has 3 general verses, each focusing on a certain individual pig. The first being a big man with their head in the pig bin and keeping on digging, likely a reference to those who abuse nature and drill for resources like oil and gold and whatever. The second refers to a bus stop rat bag, whatever that means, who radiates shards of cold broken glass and likes the feel of steel. Likely those who trade in weaponry and conflicts, and likely exploit wars and conflicts just for profit, mainly. And the third being a direct stab at Mary Whitehouse, the house-proud town mouse who was actually a British conservative and Puritan who apparently sought to censor and castigate anything remotely risque and not to her liking. So basically, Whitehouse was an SJW Karen before either were ever even a thing. Who knew? Anyways, at the end of each verse, Roger goes on to say, possibly sarcastically, how much of a laugh and a cry these pigs are, followed by what seems to be a piano glissando, sounding like something you hear out of a cartoon. Then between the second and third verses, we get the delight of listening to David Gilmour playing with a talk box on his guitar, almost mimicking the sounds of squealing pigs, and it is glorious. Then after those instrumental bits, we get to the third verse, of course, where Roger emits a few frantic breaths here and there, and another of David's tense and rebellious guitar solos that closes out once more. Then it sags into the sounds of sheep blaring and birds twerping, as if we're now finding ourselves in the middle of this vast open outside field. And thus begins Sheep, representing the most common of people and civilizations. This begins with a playful yet unsettling Rhodes piano from Ricky Wright, plus a dark bass reminiscent of One of These Days, slowly rising to the surface, symbolizing an impending danger and threat. And suddenly the song kicks into a hard-rocking warning sign, with Roger Waters on vocals, going on of how we could remain blissfully ignorant of potential dangers around us, or how we could overreact over small things and nuisances, and ultimately, we're easily scared and threatened into submission. So basically, sheeple. Then after a series of instrumental battles between the synth and the guitars, we spiral into a strange section, also not unlike One of These Days. In it, we could hear the returning loop of Gilmour's stone bit as a form of continuity. Then we get a monotone vocoder-enhanced voice uttering a twisted version of the popular Lord is My Shepherd psalm, which kinda sounds like it was guest performed by Soundwave. To be fair, according to Family Guy, he met his human wife in a Christian chat room. Who knew? Then, as soon as that ends, with the commenced uprising of the sheep, we cut back to Roger, falling on our necks with a scream. At least the lyrics tell us that. Although Roger does bring out another bit of maniacal laughter here, with wave after wave of demented Avengers. Demented Avengers? My god, this must be the Ultimate Marvel Universe! Now we're really in a dystopian world! But in the end, the sheep seemingly gallop over the sheep and over the dogs and pigs, and the song concludes with the heavy rocking progression that acts like a victory march for the sheep before it fades on by and we return to the tranquil sounds of sheep again. This song, along with Dogs, were first actually composed as far back as 1974, titled Raving and Drooling and You Got to Be Crazy respectively, where they were originally intended to be on what would become the Wish You Were Here album alongside Shine On You Crazy Diamond, and were even performed live in early forms. However, as Shine On was split into two halves and new material were added in between, these two were saved for later, where they would be slightly adjusted and rewritten to better accommodate the new theme and concept of this album. Probably the best in my opinion. And so, our album ends with a transition into the book ending, Pigs on the Wing Part 2, which acts as a form of hope, triumph and clarity after so much darkness, chaos and aggression. However, it's also possible that the sheep haven't ultimately become the new dogs and pigs, the very thing they sought against, and thus the cycle continues on endlessly and viciously. At least that's one way of putting it. But still, as long as we empathize with each other, we won't feel any more alone, nor the weight of our stones. We've found ourselves a home, a safe place to bury our bones, and a shelter from pigs on the wing. Except on social media, where we seem to pay complete attention to the pigs on the wing. But hey, not everything can be perfect. With all that, this album rocks. This album is pretty much part of the big four of the Floyd albums, with Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, this, and The Wall. This also possibly started what could be considered the trilogy of Waters-led Floyd albums that dealt with heavy themes, with The Wall and The Final Cut going afterwards. Even if you don't entirely agree with their views, you can still enjoy their music regardless. And an album like this is no exception. It demonstrates that. It's dark, but it also offers a chance of hope at the end. The solos are excellent, and the vocals are substantial. All four members have have an equal amount of credit to the song, even if even if they don't get much actual literal credit in the actual, track listing. And all that said, I think this can work well as a prequel to the Wall story. How Pink himself reflects on this whole dog, pig, sheep society that he's been thrusted into, and how it played something of a major significant part in the slow building of his metaphorical wall. Again, probably not intentional, but it's fun to think about. If you're into politically charged music or protest music or whatever, I say give this album a whirl. This musical Red Bull will no doubt give your pigs some wings. Next time we cover a slightly more recent album from the 2000s, and one from the Chemical Bros. Do, 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 do. Hello there. Where did you come from, little fella? Or rather, who did you come from? You look like something rather interesting. Hmm.